So today we're here with Ethan, who's the Senior Creative Principal at Zendesk. Ethan, thanks for joining us today. So you're the Senior Creative Principal. What does that mean? What do you do? And what is interesting about your company?
Well, Senior Creative Principal is actually just a fancy / slightly more confusing name for Executive Creative Director. Basically, it just means that I don't have people management responsibilities anymore. Thank you. It's a huge blessing, let me tell you. And my job is kind of a creative director type of thing, all the usual creative director stuff. I'm still working on like our big brand awareness campaigns, advertising, that sort of thing, but also includes messaging architecture, creative strategy, and making sure that there's just like brand consistency throughout the company. As for what's interesting about Zendesk, I think what's really interesting and what's fascinating to me and what's challenging and makes the job kind of compelling is that we work in this seemingly uninteresting area. Zendesk makes customer support software. And that sounds kind of boring when you just say those words, but it's actually a thing that has like this really big impact on everybody's lives. We are all customers and our lives are full of customer service. And those interactions that we have are kind of terrible. It has like this really negative impact on your day, as anybody who's ever had to, wait on hold for hours will tell you. So Zendesk is working to make all that stuff better. And if we can do it, then it actually makes things better for people in this like small but appreciable way. So I think the challenge is pretty interesting, and making interesting stories around something that seems kind of boring is also pretty creatively challenging as well. So, keeps me busy, keeps me interested.
That's cool. That's cool to hear how you have thought about a practical impact and like purpose behind the software. How did you get to where you are now?
That was a little bit of a weird journey. My childhood ambition was to be a rock star. And as you might imagine, that didn't work out for me the way that it doesn't from so many people who want to be rock stars. But I actually worked in the music industry for quite a while. I was a touring musician for a while, and then I worked for a bunch of record labels and worked in radio for a long time. Had my own independent record label and music company for a little while. And that label our office was right next to a creative agency. And so we became buddies with the people that worked there, and they saw the writing that I was doing for I used to have a little music blog where I would write these weird rambling stories about new bands that I was into. And they were like, "Hey, you're pretty good at this copywriting stuff. Have you ever written before?" And I was like, "Oh yeah. I mean, I do our PR, I do all this other stuff." And they're like, "Well, you should try some of this other stuff." And so when the economy kind of tanked, it was back in around 2008, 2010, and I had to shut the label down, they were like, "Well, we've got plenty of work if you want some copywriter work." And so I was like, "Yeah, sure. I'll give that a shot." And quickly sort of transitioned into being a freelancer, working with a bunch of creative agencies, a bunch of brand strategy agencies, and said to myself, I don't ever want to work in tech because that seemed really nerdy and not cool to me. And like I said, I wanted to be a rock star. So I was still very, very focused on trying to be at least a little bit cool. But then I found this company, Zendesk, that was like taking this thing that was ostensibly kind of boring and doing some really cool stuff with it. Their brand had a great voice. Their videos were really funny and quirky and charming, and their design was really interesting. And so I hopped on there and been there for a while now, almost 10 years, which is like a lifetime in tech years.
Yeah. So was that your first company that you worked at that wasn't an agency?
Yeah, I did some weird sort of like temp work when I first moved to New York, back in the sort of the mid early 2000s. And so I actually spent a long time working for a bank, doing some weird brand stuff that was very dry and not sexy. but yeah, everything else after that in between was it was just agency work. So I worked at a bunch of different agencies, and then this was the first sort of in-house thing that I did.
Oh, very cool. So you mentioned you've been at Zendesk for a while. You've seen a lot of change, seen a lot of things come and go. What's changed most dramatically just in the last couple of years with COVID and now coming out of COVID?
Yeah, I mean, it's been an emotional roller coaster, and I'm not sure we're off it yet. I think we might still be on that same roller coaster. Hard to say. A lot of stuff happened at, in the world at large, in tech specifically, at Zendesk specifically, and it was all very fast and very chaotic. So pandemic hit, lockdown, everybody started working from home, which is just a weird thing for a creative group to do because we all work so closely and collaboratively with each other. The office space that we used to have was, it was like a beautiful, sparkling tech company office. And then our particular section of it was really well equipped. We had all kinds of cool art on the walls. There was music was always playing. People were always doing cool stuff. We had editing bays, and we had a big sort of craft studio where we would actually do big screen printing things. And the vibe there was just really good. It felt creative. Like you walked in there, you're like, oh man, I want to do some cool shit. And so being taken out of that was a real sort of gave everybody in the team kind of sort of creative whiplash. But in the middle of all that, there's the pandemic of going, which is of course crazy for everyone. And a lot of businesses were either failing hard or experiencing crazy upticks in success. And Zendesk was really successful in that moment because basically any business that had customers was experiencing one extreme or the other. Either their business was totally going down and they needed to talk to customers about that, or there was this sudden huge increase in volume and they needed to handle that. And Zendesk was kind of right in the middle of all that. So it was a pretty wild ride for us. And then just recently, Zendesk was a public company and got bought by a private equity firm. And so the whole dynamic at the leadership level changed for us. So there's just been a lot. It's the only constant has been change. I'll just say that. And having to deal with that has been anxiety inducing, exciting, exhausting, kind of, like I say, all the emotions.
Yeah. All while trying to do your jobs and keep things growing. Right.
Yeah.
So with respect to that office, I had the opportunity to visit you guys a couple of times there, right on Market. Is the plan to ever go back, or are you guys remote first as a company now, or what's the thinking?
Yeah, their company's official stance is that we are digital first, and that we are a globally distributed workforce. There's people working all over. Even the creative team now is kind of all over the place. We used to be just centralized in London and California. And I think, a lot of companies, they're finding that works well for a lot of people. But we are making more efforts these days to get together in person and, sort of establish those moments of human connection, which are just crucial to humans, but to creatives specifically. And we've just started doing a little bit more of that. And I hope to see a lot more in the coming months because it is very, very helpful. And it just, I think, revives everybody's energy and makes everybody reminds everybody of oh yeah, these are the cool people that I work with, and we're going to make cool stuff together.
Yeah. I mean, that really resonates with what we're experiencing, I think, and some of the conversations that we're having internally as well.
It's nice when you see a face instead of just their name in Slack. You're oh yeah, you're a human being for sure.
Yeah. And well, the screens is sort of a weak approximation of real human contact, but Slack represents this nonstop fire hose of communication and demands on your attention and time that I think are just a little bit unhealthy for your brain in general. And a lot of people aren't necessarily great writers, so some of the communication or some of the feeling in the communication gets lost there. And then sometimes people are just busy and they're just kind of throwing messages out the door as they run by on Slack, and it can add to that feeling of disconnection. So being in person, you get to really interact with people. You get to see their body language. You're just reminded, oh, these are people,
Okay. So the name of this podcast is Best Story Wins. And the term storytelling gets used quite a bit in the world of marketing, whether it's on LinkedIn, Twitter, you name it. Sometimes it gets used, I think, wrongly, and in some cases, I think it gets overused. As someone that builds brands and grows businesses, how would you describe what storytelling is and what it isn't in the context of marketing, brand building?
Yeah, I'm totally with you. I think it gets overused a lot. I think people use it as a proxy for a whole bunch of different things with like ideas and methodologies that they want that they don't really know how else to describe. Um, and I think that happens a lot in business too, where, like business people have this sense that like, oh, I want something a little bit more like emotional or a little bit more compelling, but they don't totally understand what it takes to get there. And so they just kind of use this sort of blanket term. Um, we actually, on our team, we like to use the term story thinking, which is like a sort of a design thinking adjacent principle. And basically, it's the idea that, like the best way to share and understand information, like of any kind, is to put it into the narrative format. And so that can be anything from like a TV commercial or a banner ad to like complex product info or brand messaging architecture. But the idea is that like rather than give people just like, a list of features or a ton of facts or just, sort of inundate them with rules or, whatever it is you're trying to convey, you want to be able to tell people a story. You want to be able to craft it in such a way that there's like context, that there's a little bit of an emotional journey, there's a story arc, there's like all of the basic sort of structure that you would use to just tell a story, but apply that to any way that you're trying to share information with people. And I think if you do that well, it can make even the most boring stuff interesting, or at the very least palatable, so that people understand and take in what you want them to understand and take in.
Yeah, that's great.
Sorry,
What-
that's you just made me think of something. I really like that story thinking. I was rapidly typing like, oh, I could apply that to this writing that I'm thinking through, and like it's easy in the context of, or it's natural in the context of like we're working on the brand story right now. But I like how you mentioned applying that to other thinking or communication, even like internal communication. What's your favorite structure for a narrative? Or like, do you have a go-to that when you start going through, like, or can you elaborate on the story thinking methodology a bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, this goes back to like the first question you asked me about like what the hell does a creative senior principal do? And there's a little bit of that story thinking methodology applied to sort of everywhere in the company. A lot of times we will have a lot of executives who be like, I need to get all of this information to everybody. I want them to understand all of these things. And, like they're not thinking about how people receive that information. They're just like, I want people to understand this. I want them to act on it. And so we sort of serve as like I don't want to say a filter, but like the sort of the people that like prepare and sculpt and craft that information so that they can achieve their communication goals, right? So we have at Zendesk, we have some brand guidelines that we use that sort of guide all of our work. And we always said like sort of the first gate that anything has to pass through is that it has to be distilled, right? Like you have to take out the complexity. You have to take out all the stuff that could distract or confuse people, because they won't listen, right? Like if you get to the point where you're boring people, or you're putting them to sleep, or you're confusing them, or you're making them feel frustrated, doesn't matter what you have to say or how important it is, they're not going to hear it. As far as other structures go, like I always think of a narrative structure, like the 3-act play kind of thing. But as far as like marketing goes, the biggest distinction that we'd like to make is the difference between push and pull content, right? Which is, this is a marketing 101, but if you're trying to get people's attention, that is, if you're pushing information out at them, you have to adopt the right tone, you have to adopt the right feel, the right level of complexity, because you're sort of waving your hands and saying like, hey, pay attention to me. Well, like what I have to say is interesting. And that's like one level of communication that's usually simpler. It's usually a little bit more charming or interesting or funny or serious or emotional. And then once you get their attention and they're like, okay, I'm willing to hear what you have to say, tell me more. Then you switch to pull content, which means that they're actually like pulling it for themselves and saying like, okay, well, you've got my interest now. Tell me about this, that, and the other. Tell me about your features or whatever. And so that's like a really simple distinction to make, but I think it's an important one because, like I say, a lot of people think that what they have to say is really important. So they want to give you everything at once. And so just having like a simple way to divide like those two sort of levels of information, I think is really crucial and really essential to the sort of story thinking approach.
That's so cool. Thanks for unpacking that a bit.
Yeah. So as someone who's, charged with kind of overseeing or shepherding the story at Zendesk, I would imagine you have a good sense of like what resonates with people about the story. Curious if you could speak to what you've heard, whether it's from buyers or from employees, that really like is emotive or that triggers an emotional reaction and makes people, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it, like really gravitate towards the brand.
Yeah, it's tricky. One of our creative directors on the video team like always likes to make this joke about like, Nike, for example, like everybody knows what they do, right? Like they're like, yeah, like we make shoes, right? You got it. You understand shoes. Cool. We all know what shoes are. Now we can show slow motion footage of athletes doing cool stuff in the rain and it doesn't matter. Whereas we have like a slightly bigger hill to climb because like we have to first explain what it is that we do. Fortunately, like I said earlier, we're all customers and we've all had good and bad customer experiences. And so we like to tap into those stories to make it personal. Zendesk is a B2B company, and conventional wisdom around B2B says that like you don't do any kind of storytelling. Like you're just talking to businesses. They just want to know the value. But the fact is that like any businesses are made of people, and like they like to hear people related stories, and they're all customers too. And so speaking to them about just like real life experiences, like we all know what it's like when this happens, or we all know what it's like when that happens. And like, if this is bad, you want to know how to fix it because you don't want your customers to have that experience. And if it's good, you know what that feels like as well. And that's the thing. If you care about your business and you care about your brand, like this is the one that you want to offer to your customers. And that seems to be pretty compelling. Because you just get it right away. You're like, okay, like even though the software is like incredibly complex, and even though like the business use cases are incredibly complex, everybody understands the end game, which is that like you don't want to have a shitty customer experience.
Yeah, that's great. Does that seem to be something that internally, when it comes to like internal comms and helping to share that story, does that become sort of a rallying cry for your team as well? Like, you mentioned before that everyone's a customer all the time. Like, does that seem like there's like just like everyone's all in on just really trying to make things better for the end customer, and they're able to care about that because they can empathize themselves as a person, as a customer?
Yep, exactly. Everybody gets it. We're constantly talking about like, oh, I had this weird customer experience, or like, check out how cool these people are. Look at the way that they talk to me. And as a company, as a whole, our goal is to be customer obsessed. And that's like, we didn't make that term up. I think that's like standard terminology within the industry, but it's a very real part of how we do business. There's a lot of times where we're sitting around working on something and we'll ask ourselves like, okay, but how's that going to help our customers? Like, how's that's going to help their customers? How's this going to help people understand what we're doing or what we're offering to them? And like, we want to make things easy. We want to reduce complexity, all those things. And so we often use that as the litmus test for the quality of the work that we're doing.
You mentioned there's a couple of things I want to follow up on there, but first with the customer obsession, and you mentioned, it's not your term, but with the sum total of everything you're doing across your storytelling, what do you think has created this like defensible moat of sorts for you?
Well, it's going to sound a little oversimplified, but it's really true. Is that a lot of these of our competitors are technology first companies. And we are a customer first company. Like, we have been focused on the customer experience since the beginning. And so we just have like a tremendous amount of experience and a tremendous amount of data on like who customers are, what they're doing, what they like, what they don't like. We have tons of expertise, and we bring that to bear on whatever it is that we're doing, whatever aspect of the technology, be it the UI or like the back end or the branding or the marketing or any of that. And that's a real difference between us and a lot of our other companies. Like, even with like all the new AI stuff that we're making, like it's at the back end, it has just years and years of like training from all of our customer data and from all of the experience that we have interacting with customers.
That's amazing. With the other follow up I had, kind of on a related note, there is you mentioned drawing from these even like anecdotal experiences of who's doing it really well. Who do you think is doing this like customer support really well?
Let's see. I mean, there's always, there's everybody always like says Nordstrom's, like you can return anything, or REI, or plenty of other businesses that have these like very, I think, relaxed like return policies. What I think makes a good customer experience is if it's like frictionless, like if it's just easy, like I don't have to jump through any hoops. And if like the people that I'm talking to are actually empowered to help you. Like a lot of times you'll call a customer support company, or you'll reach out to them and they'll be like, I can't help you with that. Like, did you turn it off and turn it on again? If not, I don't know. You have to talk to somebody else. And then you get handed off to all these people and you have to repeat all your information. And it's like all of the labor of solving the problem gets put on the customer. And so I think companies that don't do that are just like, yeah, I'm here and I know how to help, are really great. The two examples I can think of off the top of my head are, so I don't know what you guys have where you are. We have a local cable provider called Sonic, and they sort of position themselves as like the anti-Comcast, specifically as it came to customer support. And it's great. Like, you call them up and you're like, I don't know what's going on. This thing is working and I bought this other piece of equipment. And they're like, okay, I see what's going on. Like, we don't support that, but I know how it works. So let me just tell you how to fix it. And like, they just, or like, here, I can send you this thing. I can turn it off and on again for you. They just sort of take all of the complexity out of navigating whatever the situation is. The other one is that I had a really cool experience the other day with this company that I don't know if it's related to Shopify or part of Shopify, but it's called Happy Returns. And it's like, if you buy something from a company online that's not a huge company that has their own sort of established return policy, you just go to one of these return depots, and they're all over the place. They're like in, FedEx offices and everything. There's one like right down the street from me. And you don't have to box up the thing. You don't have to anything. Like, they send you an email and they're like, you got your thing. Do you want to return it? And you say yes. And you click on a button, and then you just walk in the store and you're like, here's my thing. Here's the QR code. And they're like, cool. And they take it from you, and that's it. And it's like easier than if you were shopping in a store. And I was like, oh, like somebody's figured that out.
Nice. On the storytelling front, since we're talking about other brands that you admire, who are some brands that you think are really telling their story well?
My current favorite is Liquid Death, the water brand. I'm not unique in thinking this, of course, but first of all, it's all, that entire product is brand, right? It's just water. It's just water. But it's expensive, and people are buying the shit out of it because it's got such a cool brand. And first of all, it's a brilliant idea to like just take water and make it like kind of cool and metal like that. And so you could drink it at a rock show and not feel self-conscious. but then their willingness to like fully just embrace that, and all of their branding and their storytelling is just so over the top and so enjoyable and so clearly designed to entertain. And I think that's the most important part, right? Like a lot of companies, they're like, okay, we'll make this funny or we'll make this cool or interesting. But at the end of the day, like you have to understand that this is our product and we want you to buy it. And Liquid Death is like, nah, fuck that. We're just going to make a crazy video of people like dressed up like old grandmas playing heavy metal. Or we're just going to blend a bunch of weird stuff in a blender and make people drink it and then ask them if it's better than Liquid Death. And it's like, it's funny. Like I watch the videos and things that they put out like just for pleasure. See what else. There's some weird and wonderful things going on social, of course. Like I'm not very active on social, but I do kind of watch what's going on. Bose, the audio brand, has put out some weird things recently. Hilton did a 10-minute TikTok that was pretty amazing. It was like very well done. And then of course like the classics are like Taco Bell and Nike, who are like just never not good. Like Nike is just great at storytelling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, going back to the Liquid Death example, if you were to tell me 3 years ago there'd be a bottled water or canned water brand that had a merch program that was wildly popular amongst like the cool kids, I'd be like, no, you're absolutely crazy. But yeah, their brand is like, I can't go to the gym, I can't like hang out on like a Thursday night or Friday night or whatever and not see someone like rocking one of their hats or one of their shirts. It's just on point on all fronts.
Yeah, it's really they just like, they kind of decided like, hey, we're going to be cool and we know what it takes to be cool, and forget everything else. And I personally love that. Just a little aside, I like when I was studying brand strategy in one of my courses, we had to do like case studies on all of these like sort of luxury brands, and one of the case studies was Supreme. And Supreme was started by a bunch of like stone skateboarders hanging out in like some Soho loft, right? And they had a bunch of cool artsy friends, and they're like, I don't know, let's make something cool and we'll put it on a thing. And of course that's grown into this like crazy lifestyle brand that got purchased by somebody else and all that. But it was interesting to watch all of the business people like try and dissect like that from like a sort of a Harvard Business Review perspective. And I'm just sitting there going like, no, because like no business people would ever come up with that, right? Like it was a bunch of like stone skateboarders and their artsy friends sitting around going like, I don't know, I think this is cool, you're cool, we're cool, let's make some cool stuff. Like who cares if it sells? That was never the intention. Liquid Death is a little bit different because like clearly they were trying to make a product. But if I'm not mistaken, the guy behind Liquid Death or the team, I feel like I should get my facts straight here, but I feel like they came from the music industry or something.
Yeah,
he go ahead.
Oh yeah, one of the top dogs was an agency guy, like a senior guy at a big agency. But I think
so knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
And
it's a great example of like, people always talk about the power of brand, the value of brand, and it's sometimes hard to put your finger on a great example. But like you said, it's water. It's like it probably costs a penny or 2 pennies to create a can, and was it $4 for a can of water?
Yeah, it's crazy expensive. And there's also like 1,000 other water brands out there that are all trying to kind of do the same thing. There's like, we're the freshest or the cleanest or the purest or the healthiest or some variation on that theme.
Blessed by monks.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, this was like, a polar bear brought this down from the Antarctic himself. And Liquid Death was just like, nah, none of that. Like, we're just going to be a crazy heavy metal brand and we're going to sell water.
Let you think of your own mortality as you hydrate yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
So besides the bottled or canned water space, where does your team and where do you go for inspiration?
Sorry, did you say what is the team?
I'm sorry. Besides Liquid Death, and you mentioned Hilton and a few other references, where do you and your team go to just to get more inspiration, and how do you all stay inspired?
My answer is going to be surprisingly predictable, or not surprisingly, I should say. It's basically like just the liberal arts canon. um, I mean, like we are certainly like looking at what's going on in the field. Like we're paying attention to all like the industry news, and like we submit to award shows just like everybody else. But like like I think that's execution stuff. I don't think I'm necessarily looking at other creative agencies or other brands going like, oh, we want to do that. I think um, good inspiration comes from good source material. And so, like we are people in the creative team are constantly talking about like books and movies and music and art. Like we take field trips when we're together to the museum and to, like do like crafts together. And, a bunch of people on our team went to like a sandal making workshop the other day. A few others people were like, they had a whole thing where they were trying to make the perfect pancake. And, we do a lot of discussion of like books and movies and things like that because, to get back to your question about storytelling, like those are the mediums where storytelling really comes to life. And those are the people that are masters of their craft. And so if I'm looking for inspiration, on how am I going to tell a good story? I'm not like looking at like another B2B brand. I'm like, how does Wes Anderson do it? Or how does Stephen King do it? Or how does Lizzo do it? And I think that's just way more interesting and way more inspiring. Actually, wait, to go back to your previous question about a brand that's killing it. I think Lizzo is killing it. Lizzo as her own brand. Man, talk about consistency across brand touch points. She's like in her music, on social media, like on her show, like in her personal appearances. I have a lot of respect for Lizzo's game. Her brand is solid.
Yeah, that's cool. And it kind of seems like she sort of, I always hesitate to say someone came out of nowhere, but it does seem like she was not a major player until all of a sudden, and now she's everywhere.
Yeah, but like everybody else, she worked a lot and very hard in the background. She was, she came from a lot of these programs back in the day. I mean, she's classically trained flautist. She was in the program that Prince put together for up and coming artists. I mean, she put in the work. It wasn't like she was like plucked out of the ether, and you can tell like her classical music training is very clear, and it's why her music is so much better than other people trying to do similar stuff. So yeah, she blew up pretty quickly, but there was a lot of hard work that went into that.
Yeah, that's my hesitation, and it's funny you just jogged my memory on the crystal flute situation, and all the hoopla. So someone that's very senior at a company and has a lot of oversight into a lot of different things. I think for a lot of people in your type of role, it can be easy to like not actually do the work and just kind of oversee the work. What's something that you personally like to stay close to or just like get your hands dirty with?
Yeah. We are actively encouraged not to do that at my level because it's not really enabling the team, right? It can be like, I think, confusing and intimidating if like you're, a junior copywriter and some old guy that's been there for years comes in and is like, I think you should do that. Then you're like, well, that seems like a directive to me, right? Like, and we want to be more supportive and instructive and guide people to getting the right answers rather than just telling them. But the fact of the matter is we are like a scrappy team for a huge company, and like I'm still in the trenches on a lot of stuff. I still work very closely with the teams doing all of our like sort of big budget brand awareness stuff. I do a lot of agency management, which means that we're like often working with the creative teams within agencies. And I still like to, whenever I have the opportunity, I still like to kind of get in the weeds on scripts for like our big budget commercials and videos and stuff, because working with our team is so rewarding for me. Our video team is just really, it's just a bunch of like hot shit, badass artists. And I just learn a lot from them every time that I work with them. I learn a lot about writing scripts. I learn a lot about how like to approach video composition or like motion graphics, or, you know, like we have our own audio engineer does custom music compositions in SFX for us, and having conversations with him are just like super geeky and wonderful. He and I can go down some serious rabbit holes, and it's just, I think, really rewarding to work very hard on something. And even if the end product ends up looking pretty simple, like to understand the amount of thought and refining that went into making something so elegant and simple is still pretty rewarding.
Okay, so obviously the macroeconomic climate's been in flux. What does that mean for brand people and marketers in general?
I mean, sadly, what it means for us right now is smaller budgets for the most part. You know, like anytime any company, any business starts to tighten up and get a tighter grip on the purse strings, like generally speaking, advertising budgets and branding budgets are one of the first things to get cut. Which is, personally, I kind of think the wrong way to think about it. You know, I think we all know that like just bursts in the market don't really do anything, but it's better to have like a longer sustained presence. You know, the way that I describe it when I go begging to our executives for money is that like it's kind of like a garden, like that you have to like constantly water and maintain. You don't just like stop watering it for 3 months and then just like turn the water back on and be like, okay, everything's fine, I hope the tomatoes are still good. You know, like you got to like maintain that and continue to put love and investment in the brand. But you know, like that's kind of like, that's just how I accept that that's the way it goes. You know, like business is gonna business, you know?
Yeah, I like the garden imagery there. So how
Works for the Bible, so you know,
Yeah.
probably works for marketing.
Yeah, for sure. What do you see, you know, outside of advertising budgets in general? What are some, you know, I guess either strategies or tactics that you see marketers just moving away from or scrapping when budgets are cut?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that everybody is doing this. Probably actually not, but I think it's the right way to go. I just read a really interesting article about how Airbnb has given up on performance marketing. Basically, like they felt they were just like buying customers, and it wasn't really worth it to them. It wasn't really a viable growth strategy. So about, I think like it was like 2 years ago, like they switched to like an awareness only style of marketing. And they just sort of in this article, they were talking about the results, and it was like hugely beneficial to the brand, like greatly increased brand equity, greatly increased the overall value of the brand, which, as we all know, is like a little hard to measure sometimes, but like they had some hard data that said it was a very smart choice for them.
That's interesting. Going back to the liquid death example you're mentioning,
Mm-hmm.
like they're probably not like thinking about hardcore conversion content, right? And it creates this affinity, like, or even your Lizzo example, where you get fans like that are actually like diehard and like become like that extension and advocate for your brand. That it's like that's kind of hard to do when you're just like, try free now.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, like performance marketing is very comforting, right? Because it's like, it's usually digital. Like you have a very easy way to track the results. Like, you know, if what you're doing is working or not. And so if you're like a marketing person that has to like be accountable for the money that you're spending and show people like, hey, I put X amount of dollars in, I got X amount of dollars out. Like, it feels very safe to do that. But I think, you know, the people that are like the brand visionaries, the people that are able to think like beyond the next quarter, but, you know, 3-5 years down the road, understand that like you have to be a little more sure of yourself. You have to know what your own story is. You have to be confident in the way that you tell it. And you have to have faith that people are going to relate to it.
So speaking of thinking a few years down the road, and I know you all have been investing in AI and have, like you mentioned, a lot of good data to train on and so forth. How are you adapting to that future, or how's that impacted your business with this becoming more of like a on everyone's lips all the time conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would divide my answer up into like what we're doing as a business and like what my personal feelings are about it. What we're doing in business is, from a business perspective, I think it's smart because, as I said, like there's a very specific use case for AI in customer support. Like there's some very clear ways that can be helpful. And we've been working on it, Zendesk as a company, for years, training our machine learning models and figuring out how to incorporate all of the data that we have from customer service interactions so that like our bots are super smart, and so that we can do better sentiment analysis and things like that. And like I say, like we are trying to make the customer experience better, and I'm seeing the ways in which that can happen. And just seeing some like very basic improvements like right out of the gate is it's sort of inspiring. I'm like, oh yeah, like this is what the future is supposed to be like. This is what AI can be helpful for. And that sort of leads me to my own personal opinion. It is that, like I'm just concerned that like the worst proclivities in capitalism will drive AI in the wrong direction, and I just think about like how everybody always assumes like, look, we'll put all the world's information on the internet and it'll be great. And that'll be like the gateway to our shining new utopia. But then we like sort of forgot about, like people and money and, and how that influences things. And so I just feel like, we're also releasing all this technology into the world without like any real consideration of like what might go wrong. And, like right away, people are using it for things that I just like, like we're using it to make art, which I think is like, it's a little bit of a parlor trick just to show off the capabilities of AI, but it's also like, I don't know, like art is what humans do, and even the AI, excuse me, even the art that AI is making is like basically ripping off human art. And it's kind of like people are doing it just to dazzle you with the technology, but it's not really doing anything good for people. And so I always just wonder, like, is that really what we want to do? Thinking that way, and then also comparing it to like what I'm seeing, like on my actual job, I'm like, man, I hope we go more in this direction and not in that direction.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I think the art angle is a really interesting one, because I definitely, I think there's kind of a spectrum too of like, because you could theoretically feed even your own photos or your own painting into it and then iterate on your own work. Or I sometimes think about like, how many different things do you have to actually like mash up or blend into a prompt or something for it to be, so to some extent original, when you think about like music sampling from other artists, like how much of the song actually has to be new and original for it to be like not a copyright violation. But yeah, it's interesting to think about. Like I've been thinking about it a lot more as like it's a new medium. It's obviously really powerful, but like when everyone has like, it's almost like word processing with spell check. Everyone technically has the ability to like spell words correctly now, but like what does it take to be an actual great writer? If anyone can make a pretty decent picture, maybe you could say anyone could steal a picture depending on your frame of reference. Like for an AI supported artist, like what actually does it take for it to like technically become art, and stand out as something really good? And it's something that sort of comes down to like, how original is it and how much does it actually make people feel something, which is sort of similar to how I guess you would judge any art. But it's wild how we're all having to like reckon with this in a way that like 6 months ago, no, it wasn't. It wasn't like, it didn't feel. It still felt kind of far out for people, and it's like now that it's just like in every conversation, I think people are going like, "Wait, are we ready for this?"
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
So.
I think what it'll end up meaning is that there's just, and this is kind of like a byproduct of the technology age at large, is that it'll just be like more sort of garbage to filter through. Like part of the reason that like in the early days of the internet, like that, like blogs and like music websites became so popular is that just all of a sudden there was like tons of stuff, and you needed some sort of reliable content filter because you're like, I don't like, there's like a gazillion MP3s online now. I don't even know which ones to listen to. I got to go to my respected music blog so they can like at least sort through the trash for me. And I kind of think like we've just seen that over and over again with new technology. I think about it like specifically in terms of music, like when Pro Tools and the first like digital audio workstations came out, all of a sudden everybody has like a recording studio in their bedroom. And so there's this huge uptick in the volume of music people are putting out. Like, whereas before it was like, maybe you had like a singer-songwriter with a guitar. Like now you have like, people putting out like an entire album that they made, like on their laptop, and there's tons of it. But it still like didn't mean that like the overall quality of music rose. It just meant that there was like more stuff to choose from. And so I don't know, I feel like AI is going to generate a lot more options. And the question to be answered is like whether or not those are good options or they're just they add more confusion.
Yeah. It's going to be easier. It's going to be easier to create bad content.
Yeah, that's a better way of saying it. Thank you. Yeah, that's more succinct.
That's what the world needed. Yes. We needed an easy way to make more trash.
Yeah. But one of the things
exactly. Yeah,
one of the things I'm excited about,
plastic of the technology world.
Yeah, exactly. But one of the things I'm excited about is like for people that actually do the work, and you have like a awesome team. You guys get creative. You know how to make creative. For people like you all, I think you're going to be able to be in this position where there's like a greater moat between those who can and those who do, and those who don't and can't. And with so many people focusing on, hey, what's a quick and dirty thing we can make? It, I think, will be really apparent to the end user. Like, okay, what is just being like churned out and what's like kind of disposable versus like what's bespoke, what's something that requires some craft to create. And I, as a creator, as a group of creators, like I'm actually, after I took a minute to kind of process like the fear that struck me when I saw how much was possible with AI, I was like, oh shit, like this is actually a really cool opportunity for us as long as we stay focused and like really lean into what we do.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And we say this all the time as a company and as a creative team as well. Like it's not the tools that make the end result, it's the people using the tools. And we say it about Zendesk, it's not a magic bullet, right? Like you still have to be the right kind of company with the right intentions. And if you are, Zendesk is the perfect tool to help you achieve your goals. And it's the same thing with, like our creative team. Like a lot of people will be like, we hear it a lot. We're like, oh, I don't know how to use Photoshop, so I'm not creative. And, we are like, hey, it's not the tool, right? It's not the camera that makes it a great director. It's not the guitar that makes a great musician. Those are tools for people who are great at their art to create the art, but you still have to have the right ideas, the right inspiration, the right creativity, the right training, the right background, the right expertise in order to make something great.
Yeah, totally agree.
Word.
Well, Ethan, it's been so great hanging out with you, and I know it's been a while, but very much a pleasure. And thanks for taking the time and for sharing your perspective on all the different things we discussed today.
Yeah, thanks. It was wonderful to see you guys and talk to you again. I know it has been a long while, but I'm always interested in hearing what you guys got going on, and I always enjoy talking to you.
Yeah, cool. Same, Ethan. Thanks for sharing your time today.